For a recorded vote on amendment number 3, printed in Part A of House Report 112-73 by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-73, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The last vote of the day on an amendment that would implement the offshore drilling safety recommendations of the BP Oil Spill Commission and would set specific new minimum standards for blowout preventer, cementing, and well design. The Senate may take up a measure early next week on a bill that would eliminate tax breaks for the 5 largest oil companies and generate an estimated $21 billion in revenue over 10 years. Congressional Quarterly reporting that the bill, sponsored by Finance Committee member Robert Menendez, would direct all of the revenue toward deficit reduction, a move calculated to put pressure on Republicans who've insisted on curbing the national debt only through spending cuts. That's in Congressional Quarterly. More now from a reporter who's been following the bills related to energy production in the House. The House begins its work this week with 2 measures aimed at expediting and expanding oil drilling. Darren Samuelson is a senior energy and environment reporter at Politico. Why are they taking up these measures?
Gas prices, gas prices, gas prices. They see a political opening to make the Democrats take some votes and show that they're trying to do something to reduce gas prices at the pump, as Americans pay, up to $4 a gallon around many parts of the country.
You mentioned, of course, gas prices. Supporters say that that'll reduce the price of gas at the pump. Is it true, and how would that work?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. I don't know that a bill like this, if it were to be signed into law, could have an immediate effect at the pump. The Republicans certainly would tell you that, but gas prices are impacted by so many more things than just domestic production. World oil prices, sort of set the tone. Global stability or instability has a factor. Inflation, the price of the dollar, the strength of the economy. So there's a lot of things going on here, and whether or not you could point to this piece of legislation and say that it would lower prices by a penny or 10 cents is a little bit more complicated.
What are opponents saying about the measures?
Well, they're saying that the Republicans are pushing really fast to try and speed up oil and gas production at a time when attention should remain on the BP oil spill and what happened a year ago in the Gulf of Mexico, that the Interior Department has actually set up a number of safety precautions, and those should be allowed to be implemented, and that the Obama administration has been doing its job of reviewing the safety standards and the permitting that was going on in the Gulf at the other rigs that were drilling in deep water and shallow water. And that the permits have been going forward at a pretty good process and a good pace, whereas the Republicans are countering that these permits have been slow-walked ever since the spill.
Tell us more about the bill coming up on Wednesday, the one that calls for an expansion of oil drilling in the outer continental shelf.
Yeah, so the bill that is coming up, and the debate begins on Tuesday and spills over into Wednesday, would speed up the permitting process and actually put a permitting timeline of 60 days for the Interior Department to respond to new permits. And it would be a 30-day initial deadline, and then there would be 2 15-day extensions. And basically that they say would kind of put Ed Markey, the Democrat, actually said today, would put sort of an NBA shot clock on how much time the Interior Department has to say yes or no. And then it would also limit a number of other abilities for citizens to file lawsuits against the Interior Department when it dislikes these suits, and force those into the Fifth Circuit, which is down in the Louisiana-Texas region, which has shown to be quite sympathetic to the oil industry.
Republicans say the legislation would reverse President Obama's moratorium on offshore oil exploration, but Democrats say there is not a moratorium in place. Which is true?
It's a little bit harder to say than that. The moratorium idea has become a political football here for sure. The Democrats have approved, the Obama administration has approved going on about 50 shallow water permits here since lifting the moratorium that was in place after the spill, and another dozen or so deep water permits, and they say that there's only about 10 more that are waiting clearance. And so they've been moving forward at a pretty steady pace in terms of clearing the permits and clearing them with sort of the safety standards that the administration put into place after the spill as well.
Darren Samuelson is with Politico. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
On this vote, the yeas are 175, the nays are 237.
Mr. Rippersberger.
On this vote, the yeas are 176, the nays are 237. The amendment is not adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
Will the gentleman suspend? The chair will entertain a motion to rise.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee rise.
The question is on the motion to rise. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Committee rises.
Take this right here. We got
Mr. Dold, right here, though. Yep.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union having had under consideration H.R. 1229 directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The chairman of the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration H.R. 1229 and has come to no resolution thereon. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Mr. Speaker, now I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 257. Resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 1231, to amend the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to require that each 5-year offshore oil and gas leasing program offer leasing in the areas with the most prospective oil and gas resources, to establish a domestic oil and natural gas production goal, and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. gentleman from New Mexico rise? Nevada rise. What purpose does the gentleman from Nevada rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that I may hereafter be considered as the first sponsor of H.R. 856, a bill originally introduced by Representative Heller of Nevada for the purposes of adding co-sponsors and requesting reprintings pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 12.
Without objection. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to remove my name as co-sponsor from the bill H.R. 1380.
Without objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 245 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 1229. Will the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Adams, kindly take the chair?
That podium.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House and on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 1229, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to amend the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to facilitate the safe and timely production of American energy resources from the Gulf of Mexico.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, Amendment Number 3, printed in Part A of House Report 112-73, offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, had been disposed of. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 8, printed in Part A of House Report 112-73. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 8, printed in Part A of House Report Number 112-73, offered by Mr. Hastings of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 245, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the House is not in order.
Gentleman is correct. The committee will come to order. The House will be in order. Members, please take your conversations off the floor. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Madam Speaker, speeding up the permitting process and thereby making it easier to drill off our country's shores in the manner that this bill does will do little to help Americans at the gas pump. According to the Energy Information Agency, even tripling our current offshore drilling capabilities by the year 2030 would lower gasoline prices only 5 cents per gallon more than if we continued at the current levels. At maximum output, the United States holds only 2%, less than really, 2% of the world's oil reserves. Not nearly enough to significantly impact the price per barrel, which is set on a global level primarily by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries that we reference as OPEC. In reality, the United States is already producing more oil per day than it ever has, yet gas prices are still around $4 per gallon. Though production in our country has actually increased every year since 2005, crude oil hit a record $147 per barrel over this same time period, demonstrating that there is little correlation between drilling levels in the United States and the price of oil. More drilling will put our businesses as well as our environment and health at an increased risk with little return to the average American. By itself, the United States consumes 1/4 of the world's oil. What drives the price of oil more than any other factor is the large scale and high demand for it worldwide. The only way we can reduce gasoline prices is to decrease our country's demand for fossil fuels by increasing our energy efficiency, improving the fuel mileage of our cars, and developing real renewable energy resources. Federal policies should focus on making these changes, not on dangerously restricting federal oversight of the industry. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time after urging my colleagues to support my amendment.
The gentleman reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Madam Chairman, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. The intent of H.R. 1229 is to put Americans in the Gulf back to work and to ensure a steady domestic supply of oil for our citizens and consumers, thereby lessening our dependence on foreign sources of oil. I must oppose this amendment. The effect of the amendment is that we are going to hold ourselves hostage to foreign energy unless we can prove that domestic energy meets some abstract standard and satisfies some bureaucrat. Where I disagree with this amendment the most is the assumption that domestic energy production might not be good for America and might not be allowed. More supply cannot help but to lower prices, reduce dependence, generate revenue, and create jobs. I see all these results of domestic energy production as good, good for America, good for consumers, and good for our balance of trade. This is true whether the impact from a single well is sufficient in and of itself to move the price of oil prices overseas or not. The real result of this amendment would be that we don't create jobs, revenue, and more energy. For these reasons, Madam Chairman, I oppose this amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to vote no, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves balance of his time. For what purpose?
Madam Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
2.5 minutes remaining.
Let me respond to my colleague first by saying that I hope no one in the Gulf is sitting out there holding their breath, waiting for this named bill here, Amendment H.R. 1229, putting the Gulf of Mexico back to work. Let me talk real here about what's getting ready to happen. The Republicans will pass this particular measure. It will go to that black hole over in the Senate and never become the law of the United States, and the administration has made it very clear that if this measure were to pass, it is not going to, in fact, be permitted under the aegis of the President's veto, which they cannot overturn. So while people in Mississippi and people in Louisiana are suffering floods right now, compounding all of the circumstances that they've had to put up with the BP oil spill, here we are dilly-dallying, making like we are going to do something to create work in the Gulf. We're not going to do one single solitary thing, and if we could do nothing more, we ought to tell the people the truth. And if we drill everywhere you say drill in America, we still would only have 1.97% of all of the oil in the world. Canada has more oil than we do, and we get plenty of it from them. Mexico almost has as much as we do. How dare we come here and talk about 2 weeks of oil that ain't going to reduce gas none and suggest to people it's going to put people back to work. Balderdash.
Gentleman reserves his time.
Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the remainder of his time. From Colorado is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. And I would just point out that it's skewing the statistics and not accurate to say that the U.S. only has 2% of the world oil reserves. When you look at BTUs, energy production, we have more energy available in this country than any other country in the world. And looking at oil specifically, we have 145 billion barrels of recoverable oil, according to the CRS. So that is much larger than what some people say. And on the point of whether the President has taken a position, this is the statement of administration policy on this bill, and there's no veto threat in here. So if we are fortunate to see this bill not just pass the House but the Senate as well, I'm sure the White House will seriously consider this, and I would be hopeful that it would be signed into law. With that, Madam Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is now on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Is the opinion of the chair the noes have it?
Madam Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentleman asked for a recorded vote.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in Part A of House Report 112-73. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-73, offered by Mr. Deutsch of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 245, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Chairman, a little more than a year ago, the BP Deepwater Horizon oil drilling vessel exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. Over several months, millions of gallons of oil were dumped into the Gulf. The oil spill caused irreparable damage to delicate ecosystems, damaged natural barriers that protect states along the Gulf of Mexico from deadly storm surge, and was devastating to local jobs and livelihoods along the Gulf Coast. Indeed, the oil spill caused significant harm to my state of Florida's environment and economy, from which we are still recovering. My amendment will have no impact on the overall bill. While I do oppose weakening the federal review process of lease applications for energy development, production, and exploration of the Gulf of Mexico, the purpose of my amendment is simply to correct an injustice to the residents of Florida and Alabama in the bill as it is written. My amendment would strike Section 202, which imposes an exclusive venue in the Fifth Circuit for civil actions relating to the leasing of federal lands in the Gulf of Mexico for energy development, production, and exploration. Under this provision, litigation relating to leases on energy development can only be filed in a district court in the Fifth Circuit. And while the Fifth Circuit includes the Gulf Coast states of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, 2 states that comprise substantial Gulf coastlines, Florida and Alabama, are in the 11th Circuit. And it makes no sense that the residents of these states will have to travel to the Fifth Circuit to have their cases heard. The effect of this section would be to prevent the district courts in Florida and Alabama from considering civil cases related to the issuance of leases for energy development, production, and exploration off the coastlines of these states. Congress has no business telling courts within a state that they are prohibited from considering issues involving a lease for energy development, production, and exploration that has the potential to cause irreparable environmental and economic damage to the Gulf Coast area of that state. In addition, requiring these cases to be moved from Florida or Alabama to a state within the Fifth Circuit will cause substantial hardship for the parties involved in the litigation, substantial hardship for the witnesses who would need to testify, and would result in substantial costs. Striking this exclusive venue provision would ensure that Florida and Alabama courts could hear these cases and reach a just result that reflects the needs of that state. Section 202 does provide an exception only in cases in which there is no proper venue in a court within the 5th District. However, this exception fails to redress these very serious concerns. The parties involved in litigation on leasing would first have to determine that there is no court within the Fifth Circuit that would be able to consider the case. Only after determining that there was no court in the Fifth Circuit, then the parties will be permitted to file in Florida or Alabama. In short, Section 202 will prohibit the courts in Florida and Alabama from considering and rendering a decision in lawsuits on leases for energy development, production, and exploration off their coasts. My amendment would strike the section. It makes no changes to the overall bill, provides a simple solution to address this bill's unwarranted restrictions on which courts will be able to review these leases should they pose a threat to the Gulf Coast area. I urge its adoption, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Madam Chairman, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. In order to ensure that there is a circuit court that is familiar with the legal issues surrounding civil actions involving Gulf energy production, it is important that venue be restricted to the Fifth Circuit so that those district and appeals court judges would have the essential experience and legal precedent to fairly rule on these technical cases. For that reason, I oppose this amendment. The Fifth Circuit, as was pointed out earlier, does include Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, all Gulf Coast states. If various district courts and courts of appeals throughout the country were able to hear these cases, there may be a result of having no uniformity in decision-making. And judges who do not have as much expertise or background could be making vital decisions in which the energy security of our nation hangs in the balance. It is essential that there be one federal judicial circuit that understands the technical aspects of these cases with judges who have a background in understanding offshore energy policies and practices. This will ensure that all cases are handled fairly and expeditiously and uniformly without any confusion or delay. By requiring all cases to go through the Fifth Circuit, we accomplish this important goal. For that reason, I urge a no on this amendment, and I urge my colleagues to oppose it. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his
15
time.
seconds.
I'll yield 15 seconds to the gentleman.
As a former
Yield his
judge
time.
and as a state and federal judge, I would urge my colleague from Colorado to understand something. Circuit judges don't, of necessity, in the area they live, have specific specialty. A judge may go on the bench in the Fifth Circuit and have studied patent law all of his life knowing nothing about oil.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Florida's time has expired. Gentleman from Florida.
May I ask how much time is remaining?
Minute and a quarter remaining.
Thank you. Madam Chair, reclaiming my time. The gentleman's opposition to this amendment is premised on a very interesting and, I would respectfully suggest, dangerous interpretation of what is our responsibility as members of this House. The gentleman spoke of the need to have uniformity of decision-making. Uniformity of decision-making. As I understand the role of the federal judiciary, the role of our court system is to provide justice. The role is not to ensure that we have the same decision in every court. My amendment simply says that if you are a judge in the state of Florida or a judge in the state of Alabama, that you are in a position just as well as a judge in Texas or these other Gulf states to make a determination about how the law should be interpreted, the idea that judges have to have a sufficient background and that if courts throughout the country were able to hear these, we would not be able to reach a logical conclusion. The fact is, we're not asking courts throughout the country to hear these cases, Madam Chairman. We're asking the judges within the states whose coastlines would be dramatically affected and have been affected in the case of spills like the Deepwater Horizon. Madam Chairman, I would respectfully suggest that if our goal here is to seek justice, then we must seek justice in those courts where in the states that have seen the damage. I ask for the adoption of this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If the gentleman wanted to make sure that the judges of Alabama and Florida were included, then maybe the amendment should have been written that way. And I think we would have a strong point of debate, and that would be a legitimate item to discuss. However, that's not how the amendment is drafted. The amendment talks about letting in judges of the entire country, circuits of the entire country. And for that reason, I urge a no vote on this amendment. Yes, I would yield.
Gentleman yield.
Therefore, I would like to confirm, therefore, that if the language in the bill were very clear that cases for cases to be brought affecting the leasing and the exploration of oil in the Gulf, that if those cases could be brought in any of the Gulf states, including Florida and Alabama, then the bill sponsor would not oppose this amendment?
Reclaiming my time, I would say that we would have a more legitimate issue to debate, and we could go into that. But it's too late. The amendment doesn't say that, and so that's not an option in front of us.
If the gentleman would yield.
I would yield.
So just to confirm, the gentleman's position is that, in fact, the courts in Florida and Alabama are just as well equipped to hear these cases as are the courts in Texas and the other Gulf states.
Reclaiming my time, I would say that those judges certainly would have a closeness to the situation that would be helpful, but the circuit, I believe it's the 11th Circuit, includes a number of other states that are not as situated like Alabama and Florida. So in choosing the 5th Circuit, all the states there are Gulf Coast states.
Final question, Madam Chairman?
I would yield.
I would also note that while the Natural Resources Committee has acted on this bill, this provision very clearly should have been debated in the Judiciary Committee, where all of these issues could have been worked out. And it is for that reason, given what we have to work with, that I would again ask that I would ask for adoption of my amendment, which helps to bring justice and some clarity to what is otherwise a murky provision in this piece of legislation.
Well, and reclaiming my time, my understanding is that the Judiciary Committee did not have any problems with this particular revision. But having discussed all the issues around this amendment, I would urge a no vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in Part A of House Report 112-73. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise as the designee of the maker of the amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-73, offered by Mr. Hastings of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 245, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, this amendment, the scrivener of same is Jared Polis, our colleague from Colorado. And I can't resist, however, departing from the preparation that he has undergone to suggest that if my other friend from Colorado's logic is followed, then I gather that the circuit courts of the United States, all 13 of them, must be the courts of last resort. And if you followed your logic to its conclusion, I guess we would eliminate the United States Supreme Court because, of course, those 9 people wouldn't know anything about what the circuits had done wherever they came from. Madam Speaker, when reading this bill, and particularly its section on judicial review, the phrase rush to judgment came to mind to Mr. Polis, because that's exactly what this bill directs our courts to do. Instead of hearing and deciding a case based on the case's merits, this bill tells the courts that speed, not justice, should be their top priority. Madam Speaker, the integrity of any law is only as good as the court's ability to review and enforce it. We all learned in civics class that one of the strengths of our nation is its system of checks and balances. Passing legislation that tilts the courts in favor of one side or another is hardly in line with this most fundamental of American values, yet this is what much of what H.R. 1229's judicial review section does. Mr. Polis's amendment that I offer as his designee is a modest amendment that promotes the integrity of that review and the integrity of our nation's principle of fair and impartial courts. H.R. 1229 as a whole gives an even greater handout to the well-funded legal teams employed by the big oil companies at the expense of protecting our health, our communities, our environment, and justice in general. The underlying bill in Section 204 states, and I quote, "The court shall endeavor to hear and determine any covered civil action as expeditiously as possible." Exactly who does it help when the courts are directed to make decisions in haste at the expense of research and deliberation? It only helps those who can afford teams of high-priced lawyers and lobbyists who know where and when to push the pressure buttons of influence. My colleague's amendment simply replaces the word expeditiously with the word justly, as the courts should be deciding cases based not simply on speed, but on the law. Undoubtedly, the judicial review provisions in H.R. 1229 have been included to promote the misleading argument commonly used by the majority party and the big oil companies alike that frivolous lawsuits by local communities and environmentalists strangle the industry and stall domestic drilling. Yet quarter after quarter, oil companies continue to reap record profits and are developing more domestic energy than ever before. Exxon actually is ahead of us. They're in the business of talking about gas while we're around here dilly-dallying about oil. Furthermore, this misleading hard luck story leaves out a critical fact, that the industry is just as active in using the courts to get its way as any public health or environmental watchdog, but the industry has much more money for such legal actions, already giving it an unfair advantage. In fact, recent lawsuits have been filed against the government by Alaskan oil companies to overturn critical habitat restrictions by oil companies against the EPA for ethanol standards, and numerous suits against the Department of the Interior by industry over the temporary ban following the BP disaster. Let's remember that the point of judicial review is to ensure that the law is followed and to provide a check and balance when it is not. The underlying bill is in effect saying that following the law no longer matters. It doesn't matter if justice is served and a case is heard properly. It only matters if it appears that way. Madam Speaker, the east front of the Supreme Court building contains the following inscription: "Justice, the guardian of liberty." Should any company in our country have the right to pursue profits and the prerogative of our capitalist system? Of course. But even our founders recognized that this should be done within the confines of the law, justice, meaning impartial courts and stringent checks and balances are the guardians of our liberties and freedom as Americans. Instead of promoting a rush to judgment and a blind rubber stamp within the courts, we should instead promote integrity and a system of rigorous checks and balances, as these are truly fundamental American values. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Madam Chairman, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I do oppose this amendment. Let's stand back and look for a moment at the big picture. This administration has been held in contempt of court for slow-walking permits and is currently trying to appeal a federal judge's warning that ordered them to act on stalled deepwater permits. While the administration continues to hold up the permitting process, thousands of Americans remain unemployed and American energy is locked up. This legislation encourages courts that are hearing permitting cases to act as expeditiously as possible. Environmental groups are already working to prepare lawsuits aimed at stalling and holding up offshore energy production. This bill encourages the court to work expeditiously so that lawsuits can be settled quickly. Now, by seeking to replace the word expeditiously with justly, we're doing something that's totally unnecessary. Those of us supporting this bill already assume that courts will act justly. That's what they're appointed for, and that's what we expect and require them to do. So it's superfluous and unnecessary to say they have to act justly when that's what they're going to do. At least that's our assumption over here anyway. But we need to say that they act expeditiously as well as justly because of the slow-walking nature of this current administration's approach to permitting. The effect of this amendment, were it to be adopted, would slow down American energy production at a time when prices are skyrocketing. We need judges to move cases in an expeditious manner so that we can use American energy. This bill ensures that everyone will have their day in court, but it also ensures that the slow walking of permits by this executive branch will not continue. I urge a no vote and for my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Does the gentleman yield back the remainder of his time?
If they've yielded, then I certainly would yield also. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Now, in order to consider amendment number 11, printed in Part A, House Report 112-73. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in Part A of House Report number 112-73, offered by Mr. Hastings of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 245, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. 1229, this bill, in my opinion, is an irresponsible giveaway to the oil industry that has taken enormous profits at American taxpayer expense. Section 207 of the bill repeals the Equal Access to Justice Act, thereby eliminating the awarding of attorney's fees to litigants bringing successful legal challenges, be they expeditious, just or not, to offshore oil and gas activities, making this kind of litigation prohibitively expensive. The BP oil spill demonstrated there has been a lack of federal oversight of the drilling industry. Consequently, legal challenges have become the only enforcement mechanism for many related laws and regulations. Removing the judiciary system from the equation makes it even less likely that large oil and gas companies will comply with environmental and safety standards. Let me insert something here. The commission that was set up under BP, a colleague of mine in the Rules Committee said that BP has been accountable. Only 3.8%, $3.8 billion of the $20 billion has been let to 177,000 claimants, and that ensures, among other things, that by 2013, at the expiration of the Commission's term, there will be money left over. And guess what my friends at Fox News reported? That the money goes back to BP. How crazy can we be around here? Eliminating the awarding of attorney's fees means that the traditional groups who bring lawsuits on environmental or safety grounds, such as fishermen, small business owners, and environmental groups, will no longer be reimbursed for the cost of successfully litigating these kinds of claims. The idea that the bill will somehow eliminate an excess of lawsuits is ridiculous. Since litigation is by its nature so expensive, these cash-strapped plaintiffs usually only bring those lawsuits with the most likelihood of success. Without the possibility of receiving attorney's fees, legal challenges will effectively become impossible. Madam Speaker, Section 207 of H.R. 1229 only helps large oil companies avoid having to comply with U.S. law. I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Madam Chairman, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I do oppose this amendment. The Equal Access to Justice Act provisions in this bill are necessary to avoid costly delays to domestic energy development based on the extreme anti-energy agenda of a few groups. The Equal Access to Justice Act was intended to allow people and small businesses with limited financial means the ability to challenge the actions of the federal government. However, it is now being abused by deep-pocketed special interest organizations. For example, in 2005, the Sierra Club and the Natural Resources Defense Council received nearly $200,000 in taxpayer dollars after suing the federal government in an offshore energy project in California. The Sierra Club has annual revenues of $85 million, and the Natural Resources Defense Council has annual revenue of over $100 million. There is no justification for forcing the American taxpayer to pay the attorney's fees of special interest groups that have ample funds of their own. Wealthy ideological groups opposed to more American-made offshore energy can continue to sue to their heart's content, but taxpayers shouldn't have to foot the bill. I oppose this amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Taxpayer dollars should not go to lawsuits being filed by special interests making millions and millions of dollars in annual revenue. I urge a no vote, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, when you're flabbergasted, the easiest thing to do is just don't say anything else. I just can't believe that we are doing this useless legislation while people in the Gulf are hurting the way that they are. It's senseless. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Colorado.
Madam Chairman, I urge a no vote on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is now on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
I move the committee rise.
The question is on the motion to rise. All those in favor say aye. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The committee rises.
He's going to come on and take your place.
Okay.
Shortly. Read that card.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union, having had under consideration on 1229, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 1229 and has come to no resolution thereon. For the House, the following personal requests.
Leave of absence is requested for Mr. Hastings of Washington for today and the balance of the week, and Mr. Jackson of Illinois for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening about jobs and particularly about our Make in America agenda. But before I begin, I'd like to yield as much time as he deems necessary to the gentleman from Michigan to begin this conversation.
Thank you, Representative Cicilline. And, I represent the city of Detroit. In fact, the congressional district that I represent includes metropolitan Detroit. And over the last 10 years, metropolitan Detroit has lost more jobs than any other metropolitan area in this country. But it wasn't just Detroit and its metropolitan area that's lost jobs. Other areas, other cities, other metropolitan regions in the country have lost millions of jobs over the last 10 years. Now, during the same time frame, this country has been investing our tax dollars to build bridges, to repair roads, to build hospitals, sewer systems, schools, to build industrial parks that will promote more business, to actually develop businesses in free enterprise models that are successful. Now, many of the American people may not have seen the benefits of this type of investment because all of the work that I'm talking about that was funded by tax dollars was done in Afghanistan. And the people who directly benefited from these projects were the people of Afghanistan. My position is this: we need to create jobs in America. We need to keep the jobs that we have here so they don't go overseas like they have in the past. In order to do that, I'm proposing let's take a share of the money that's intended to go to Afghanistan, redirect it to the United States to create jobs right here, jobs for the American people, because we're the ones that actually need it. And it makes sense. The money that we're investing in Afghanistan comes from U.S. taxpayers. Let's spend it in a way that benefits the taxpayers and creates jobs right here in the United States. Now, I do understand that we've got to stop terrorism from breeding in other countries, and we certainly don't want other safe havens for terrorism to develop overseas. But in light of the fact that bin Laden is now gone, I'm asking this Congress, this administration, to reassess our mission in Afghanistan. Let's take a part of the over $500 billion, and that's trillion with a T, in military assistance that we've spent in Afghanistan over the last 10 years. Let's take a share of that and return it home to protect our people right here in the United States. Yes, we are at risk of a terrorist attack, but more than likely, that risk is increasingly coming from within the U.S. So let's fully equip and fund the first line of defense against terrorism in this country, which is our first responders. It's our local police, our local firefighters, our local emergency medical providers that we call on to help protect the American people. So I'm proposing let's take a share of that military assistance that's going to Afghanistan and let's invest it in our local police, fire, and emergency medical providers to protect our citizens right here at home. And then finally, over the past 10 years, taxpayers have invested nearly $30 billion, and that's billion with a B, so we get these figures clear in the magnitude of our investment. We invested nearly $30 billion in Afghanistan for non-defense spending, much of it going toward economic development and civilian assistance. Let's take a portion of that funding and redirect it to the United States to create jobs right here. My point is this: it takes money to create jobs, and more accurately, it takes public funds that can be leveraged effectively to create the investment that yields jobs. We've been spending that money for over a decade in another country. Bin Laden is now gone. Let's reevaluate our role in Afghanistan. And while we're doing that, let's take a share of our precious tax dollars. People, this is your money, and we need it right now to create jobs, to fight foreclosures, to invest in manufacturing. It's our manufacturing capacity that made this country strong, that created the best products that were sold around the world. It's our manufacturing strategy and capacity that transformed the city that I represent, the city of Detroit, from the motor capital of the world to the arsenal of democracy back in World War II. And Metro Detroit and this country's ability to innovate and create and manufacture saved this country and saved this world from fascism. If we invest a portion of the money right now that we're spending overseas, in Afghanistan, and as we're winding down in Iraq, and we invest it right here in cities like Detroit, and Elkhart, Indiana, and Louisville, Tennessee, these are other cities that also have lost a lot of jobs. we can make America stronger. We want to fight terrorism. We need to be a strong country. But the strength of our country comes from within. It comes from protecting the American people. And the most effective way to do that, invest in homeland security, support our local police and fire, and invest in jobs in America so that U.S. citizens can be financially stable and hopefully prosperous. This is how we built this country in just a little over 200 years into one of the greatest countries human civilization has ever known. We've done it by investing the people's money into the innovation and capacity to create jobs. It's through investing in the U.S. And you know, I know I've been going on a little bit longer, but my point is this. I'm asking the American people who are watching tonight, call your member of Congress, ask, demand if you wish, that a share of your money that's going overseas right now be returned back to you to create jobs here, to protect our home in deficit. We've been spending the money, over $500 billion alone in the last 10 years in Afghanistan. This administration is slated to wind down that expenditure. Let's take a portion of that back to help our people, to make America strong again. You know why it's so important for America to be strong and not some other country? Because we believe in democracy. We, the people, actually have a voice through folks like me, who you hired. I have the constitutional duty to be your voice here, not just for Metro Detroiters, but for all of you who understand the value in manufacturing. That's the reason why my dad risked everything 80 years ago during the midst of the Great Depression to leave his homeland in India, to come here as a dream, so he could live his life as fully as he chose it, and to raise a family. I'm his only son, and he was so honored to see many decades ago the first Indian American elected to Congress. And I'm here too as a legacy of an immigrant's courage to make a difference for himself, his family, and his country. My point is this, people. It's our money. And you work hard for that money. And yes, we invested it overseas because we were trying to stop the people that were determined to wipe us out. And we got the ringleader. We took him out. Let's take a share of our money back and return it to our people. Let's create jobs here. Call your member of Congress. Do it tonight. Leave him a voicemail message. Tell him we need you as a member of this body that's constitutionally committed to represent the people. We need you to use a share of our money to help American families become financially stable again, and to help this country's economy really endure in a prosperous way, to help bring democracy and freedom throughout the world. Thank you very much for giving me this time, Representative. I really appreciate it. But I'm just so committed that we take a share of our funds right and create jobs here. And, you know, I'm born and raised in the city of Detroit, and it's heartbreaking to see what's happened to Detroit, but also, too, it's so much promise there in Detroit because we still have the greatest talent in manufacturing. We have great research universities there in Michigan, including Wayne State University that I'm proud to represent. And we have the plants and the land to actually build new manufacturing operations. And this country has the superb ability to innovate and outwork and out-hustle and outsmart any of the competition around the world. All we have to do is this: return some of our money, our tax dollars, back to the U.S. so that we can prosper again. And some of us are doing well, but I know overall, and I will close, that many American families are not feeling that financially secure, and I understand that. Look, I've been through hard times myself as a young man. That's why I'm stressing the fact. return a share of our tax dollars back to our people so we can do what's best. Innovate, invest, and create jobs. Thank you so much, and God bless America.
I thank the gentleman. You know, one of the things I know that we all share as new members of the Congress as freshmen is that we've been here for about 4 months, Madam Speaker, and we've had conversations and debates about cutting Pell Grants and cutting Head Start. We've endured attacks on women's health and NPR, attacks on the environment, and most recently efforts to end Medicare as we know it. We really haven't had before this Congress a jobs agenda at a time when Americans are suffering from some of the highest unemployment in a generation. And we all recognize that we need to cut spending. We need to be responsible in our management of the national debt. One of the key ways that we can do that is to grow our economy and get Americans back to work. And I believe, Madam Speaker, that one of the key ways that we can do that is to rebuild the manufacturing base in our country. There is no way we can maintain our position as a great economic power without making things in America. Making things in America is really a key part to rebuilding the economy of this country. My home state of Rhode Island is one of the states that's been hardest hit in this economic downturn. Rhode Island was the first New England state to enter the recession and is currently facing the 5th highest unemployment in America. But Rhode Island has a strong tradition of manufacturing. It's the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. This helped build the middle class and provided good-paying jobs for working families. In fact, Rhode Island used to produce 1/3 of the costume jewelry in the entire United States. Yet our manufacturing sector has been really hard hit, especially in these particularly difficult economic times. In fact, according to the Alliance for American Manufacturing, there were 71,100 manufacturing jobs in Rhode Island in 2000, and by the year 2008, that number had dropped to 47,900. Rhode Island lost 15% of its manufacturing jobs during the period of 2008 to 2009 alone. And from 2001 to 2008, Rhode Island lost 10,500 jobs due to trade with China. When was the last time, Madam Speaker, that you went into a store and found something made in America? Manufacturing jobs all across this country have seen a steep decline, from 20 million jobs in 1979 to about 12 million today, and the middle class has been left behind. And that's why this past week, when we launched the Make It in America agenda, I became so hopeful about this Congress's attention on manufacturing. This agenda is really about reversing manufacturing job loss. It's about investing in good-paying jobs, world-class education, top-notch research, and sound infrastructure. We need to create an environment that encourages American manufacturers to innovate, grow, keep and create good jobs here in the United States. When we make it in America, our middle class will succeed. This agenda is based on the conviction that when more products are made in America, more families will be able to make it in America. The agenda is really intended to create the conditions to help American businesses produce goods here, to innovate and create jobs. It also includes being smart about the investments we make to out-educate, out-innovate, and out-build our international competitors. The President has already signed 6 Make It in America bills into law, many of them which enjoyed bipartisan support, because business and labor leaders alike recognize that the Democratic agenda of making it in America is good for our country and is central to the future of our competitiveness, our jobs, and our leadership in the world. And so this past week, we outlined a series of bills that represent really a cross-section of the legislative package, a dynamic agenda that will continue to evolve during the 112th Congress, but is really focused on how we support the manufacturing sector again. Some of these bills have already been introduced. Others will be introduced in the coming weeks. The agenda includes the development of a national manufacturing strategy, directs the President to work with the industry leaders, labor leaders, other stakeholders to develop a national manufacturing strategy for our country, to set appropriate benchmarks and measurements. Every other nation we're competing with, who's serious about manufacturing has a national manufacturing strategy. The agenda also includes the Build America bonds, expanding the Build America bonds, the creation of a national infrastructure development bank. If we're going to compete in the 21st century, we need to have an infrastructure which supports that competition. We need to have roads and bridges and transit systems and the ability to move information to compete in the 21st century. It includes making the research and development tax credit permanent and more generous to encourage job creation. It includes the creation of small business startup savings accounts, a reform of the Chinese currency system to give our American manufacturers a fighting chance to compete in the global marketplace. And it includes the Make It in America block grant, which I have drafted. This is a block grant which will help American manufacturers retrofit their factories, retrain their workers, buy new equipment, increase their exports, and make their facilities more energy efficient so they can compete more successfully in the 21st century. It's an ambitious agenda, but it's really about recognizing that we have got to start making things again in this country, that manufacturing was an important part of the history of America, an important way we built up the middle class in this country and became a world economic power. And we can no longer act as if manufacturing is not important. We need to make things here again so people can go into stores and buy things made in America. We need to start exporting goods made in America all over the world because we make the best products, we have the best workers, and stop exporting jobs. This is an agenda which I hope will earn bipartisan support. That will be a key to helping rebuild the economy of our country and rebuilding our strong manufacturing base. Madam Speaker, I think the most urgent priority we face is getting Americans back to work. Americans have been very hard in this recession. Members hear it all the time from constituents back at home. What are you doing to get people back to work, to get this economy back on the right track? This Make It in America agenda, I believe, provides a real opportunity to again rebuild the manufacturing base of this country so that we can make things here again and so that American families can make it as well. At the same time, in addition to investing in this agenda, we also need to invest, as the President said, in education so that we can out-educate, so that our kids can compete, not just with the kids in the neighboring town or the next state, but kids in China, in India, and Germany, and all over the world. That's who they're competing with in the 21st century. And we need to make sure they have the tools and skills necessary to compete successfully in the global economy. In addition, we have to invest in science and research and innovation so we can continue to make the new discoveries, make the new inventions, create the new products that will allow us to lead the world and to, again, maintain our position as a world economic power. And that's why, as we think about the balance that we have to strike in managing the serious responsibility of reducing spending, eliminating programs that don't work, cutting waste, and at the same time investing in the things that are necessary to keep our country strong: education, innovation, and infrastructure. And so, Madam Speaker, I hope that this Congress, the 112th Congress, will be known as the Congress that restarted and reinvested in making things again in America. And I know that my colleague from Massachusetts, the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, has focused as well on creating jobs, bringing some balance to our federal budget, and understands the urgency, particularly coming from one of our great New England states, of rebuilding manufacturing. I'd like to yield some time to Mr. Keating.
Thank you. Thank you for yielding your time. I just came here to advance statements